Welcome to another episode of Lift, Lighten, and Lead with Legacy Contracts. Whether this is your first time listening or you're returning for more, we're very glad you're here. This podcast is for attorneys who want more than just efficiency. You want clarity about how your firm actually operates, how decisions are made, and where strain quietly forms beneath the surface. Today's episode is part of The Hidden File. It's a space where we examine things that shape law firms long before they become visible. The overlooked systems, unspoken assumptions, and the decisions that quietly determine whether a firm feels stable or strained. Our intention here isn't to add to the noise or give quick fixes. It's to name what's been operating unseen so that you can lead with more calm, confidence, and clarity. Let's open the file. So as we close out the month of July, this podcast episode in particular is to reflect on this month's conversations and just things that we've talked about across all of our platforms at Legacy Contracts. And we'll end the conversation with looking ahead to explore what our new theme is for the month of August. So for the month of July, the theme and things that we have discussed about all revolve around resistance to structure. And what this means in particular is not so much that law firms, managing partners, and the firm owners are resisting structure in particular, but it pretty much is hinting at and referencing the idea that often a lot of things go unnoticed inside of growing law firms. And when they experience these particular operational challenges, it's very easy to assume that the solution is just simply more effort, which then, kind of gives the name to you're resisting that initial structure. A lot of people kind of jump to, oh, we just need to communicate more, or we need to have more accountability. We need to have more meetings that interrupt the day constantly, or just, more managing partner or supervisor oversight. But the theme constantly went back to asking particular questions. The particular question is, what if the resistance that you're seeing within your law firm isn't resistance to your work, but is resistance to your structure? A lot of attorneys and firm owners don't necessarily want to constantly have to restructure their firm, but when you look at growth and what that requires and where you're trying to take your firm to, it's normally the thing that has to be done. With that being said, a lot of the perspectives and ideas that people have about recreating or even just initially creating structure is that it's a means of like a sense of control. And it kind of gives off that viewpoint of like when you finally have a structure for your law firm, then people can kind of operate within that means, and you have that level of control over how your employees interact with each other, how they get the work done, how clients can interact with your firm, and so on. But essentially what we were trying to reinforce with all of the things that we have released this month is that having your structure is a means of communicating clarity. And when you look at it from that perspective, you can kind of get a better feel and a picture of how people can receive that clarity when interacting with your firm. If they are trying to develop workflows, or if they are trying to get leadership involved in certain areas, and they want to go from inconsistent communication to being more consistent with those things, this is the means for utilizing your structure as a means of clarity instead of a means of trying to control what happens within your firm. And moving from a place of looking at it from a means of clarity often leads to, and more than likely evolves to, a place of having your firm be more stable instead of constantly creating frustration when you're trying to make space for growth. With our previous themes and things that we have discussed within this year thus far is that a lot of times people aren't resisting the ideas and things that you would assume would be very upfront. They're resisting what it would either require them to do or what it would cause as like a domino effect that they may or may not know what the actual outcome would be. So it's initially also like pieces of the unknown that happened as well. And in one of our previous months, we also had discussed how sometimes law firm structures aren't created intentionally. They're just kind of formed based off of the needs that present themselves on a consistent day-to-day basis. And so with moving into talking about resistance to systems and structures, it's not solely because of those systems. More often, a lot of people are tending to respond to how those systems were introduced based off of the needs of your firm, how clearly they were communicated, and whether or not they actually will continue to support the work that your employees and your clients are trying to move into and accomplish, especially with levels of growth. So, all in all, the foundation of this is just advising and adhering to that good structure shouldn't create unnecessary friction, it should remove it completely. And so, what we were pretty focused on with the month of July is trying to create a different way that law firm owners and managing partners can think about the resistance that they have to creating this structure. A really good shift that we were trying to move into, or even just bring visibility to, is changing the questions that we ask ourselves in the midst of trying to move forward with our level of growth. So, looking at it from a perspective of not just asking or even realizing why aren't people following the process that you have in place, you could look at it from the idea and perspective of what about this particular process is creating such resistance that more employees are from a surface level not following the process that we have in place. Why are they not following that process? What is the actual thing that they are resisting or they're not taking a liking to, or whatever else have you? Bringing to surface those different questions takes away the face value problem from being an actual person or your clients or whatever else have you, but it invites you to examine the deeper levels, which is within the theme, the structure of your firm within itself. So with looking at it from that perspective, you can kind of see a lot of times that the resistance reveals something else that's worth fixing instead of just looking at, everything as a whole. And it also allows you to see that a lot of your expectations within the processes and structures that you had in place were never made visible to begin with. And lastly, it could also reveal that a lot of people, your employees in particular, who were doing the work were never thought about or included in the actual designing of this system. So this could look like, if you have a particular billing process, it doesn't take or may not take into account all of the other things that a particular person who has to deal with that billing has to also consider. I have recognized, especially within this month and doing a lot of phone call assessments that I've had, is that a lot of attorneys kind of take that face value with creating these workflows and these systems, but they don't look at all of the other moving parts that go into workflows that affect the general overall picture. So if you're looking at assigning a paralegal the opportunity to handle invoicing and billing, that also means that she constantly has to follow up with all of the other attorneys to make sure they either have all of their billables and non-billables in place, they are putting them into the system accordingly, and if she has any or he or she has any questions or concerns, that those attorneys are getting back to her accordingly so that she's able to get these invoices out appropriately. Because stuff like that 9 times out of 10 is not necessarily considered or even thought about, a lot of attorneys are just saying, hey, I want these invoices sent out on the 30th of every month, and that prep time has to either be a couple days to a week before to send out those reminders to say, hey, your billables and any expenses or anything else have you are due, so I can have these, invoices sent out by the end of the month. And that requires a lot more work than just, hey, we're just going to review these invoices and get them out. And doing that intricate, detailed work for all of your workflows across the board, a lot of times aren't considered moving forward, especially because a lot of leadership, firm owners, and whatever else have you do not have time to consider all of the moving pieces when trying to create the structures for their firms to be able to just grow. But what comes with this is intentionally planning and creating spaces to observe the structures and systems rather than immediately moving in to try to correct it. And that could become one of the most valuable sources of operational insight that you can implement within your firm. And so this is a beautiful segue into what we'll be discussing in August, which is exploring decision architecture. This is a very nice segue and next step from the discussions in July leading into August, because with all of the things that we have been talking about, all the themes that we've presented for this year, everything kind of connects back to making decisions, defining who makes them, who owns them, who supports them, and the most important about these decisions is how does everyone else know where these decisions belong in your workflow and structure processes. So segueing into what decision architecture actually means, defining each step within those decisions, our intentions is that this will hopefully allow leadership and managing partners more support and leeway into defining these steps, clearly organizing them accordingly, and utilizing them to build and support the structure of the firm as a whole. So, as we close out this topic of discussion, we do want to leave with a question to reflect on for managing partners and law firm owners that would hopefully allow you to be able to get a better overall insight about leadership capacity and resistance to initial firm structure. And we'll include this in the show notes as well. And this would be able to help you to get that initial starting point to recognize the invisible patterns and things that are coming up that may or may not be in the way of creating opportunities to have a better structure and system in place. So the question we want to leave you with is pick one particular system, process, workflow, or expectation inside of your firm that you're either noticing has a lot of resistance backing it, or it's just constantly creating frustration. And the question to ask yourself regarding this is the resistance that you're seeing actually resistance to the structure as a whole, or is it resistance to how the structure was designed, communicated, experienced, or created within the start of the entire workflow? And the distinction here is important because we want to move away from assuming that people and your employees within themselves are resisting accountability or just avoiding the work in general, while overlooking the valuable information that the system is providing within itself. Resistance overall is very frustrating, especially when you're trying to get work done for the clients who are paying for the money that your law firm is using to grow. But it's also a point to recognize the lack of clarity within these systems and processes that you have in place. Exposure within itself is a very frustrating process to have to kind of recognize, especially when it's preventing you from that growth that you're trying to move into. But it gives you a lot of information and data that you need to make sure that your employees and your clients and leadership within itself are all operating on the same page. And you may also note with the revealing of these frustrations within the system and resistance to the overall structure that there may be an imbalance of work that's distributed within itself. There may be employees who are carrying too much, employees who aren't carrying enough, clients who are feeling frustrated by the lack of consistency and whatever else have you. So when you are witnessing these resistances, when you're seeing the frustrations that your employees and your clients are having, don't just ask the face value question of why aren't they just following the process or the system, but instead look at what is the underlying resistance trying to show about the structures that you've created, whether they've formed intentionally or they've been formed and put in place because of specific needs. And with this, the hope is that you may or may not discover that when the problem first appeared, it looked like a people problem, but it actually is an opportunity to strengthen the system within itself. So that is it for today's episode. If this conversation resonated with you, you can explore this concept further with our new ebook that launched at the beginning of this month, which we titled The Invisible Resistance: Why Law Firms Delay the Structure They Already Know That They Need. Or if you prefer, you can check out our YouTube channel or our accompanying blogs on our website to continue the topic of discussion, where we approach the same ideas but from different perspectives and a more structured visual lens. But here on this podcast for The Hidden File, it exists to slow things down, to reflect, contextualize, and give language to where many firms feel but haven't been taught to name. We hope today's insights help you move forward with greater clarity and less internal strain. Law firms aren't built in moments of urgency. They are built through consistent, intentional choices. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.